And let's continue with the 25th chapter of A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It is called A Competitive Examination, and we are looking at our protagonist, Henry Morgan's attempt to get some of his West Point educated men to become officers, but the group that King Arthur put together to examine them is, of course, all just rich men, and they laugh at the idea that one of his guys is the son of a weaver. And we're going to pick up a little bit before the video cut out last time at the beginning of that paragraph. But I appealed to the king. I begged that my candidate might be examined. The king was willing, but the board, who were all well-born folk, implored the king to spare them the indignity of examining the weaver's son. I knew they didn't know enough to examine him anyway, so I joined my prayers to theirs, and the king turned the duty over to my professors. I had had a blackboard prepared, and it was put up now, and the circus began. It was beautiful to hear the lad lay out the science of war, and wallow in details of battle and siege, of supply, transportation, mining and counter-mining, grand tactics, big strategy and little strategy, signal service, infantry, cavalry, artillery, and all about siege guns, field guns, Gatling guns, rifle guns, smoothbores, musket practice, revolver practice, and not a solitary word of it all could these catfish make head or tail of, you understand. And it was handsome to see him chalk off mathematical nightmares on the blackboard that would stump the angels themselves, and do it like nothing, too, all about eclipses and comets and solstices and constellations and meantime and sidereal time and dinner time and bedtime and every other imaginable thing above the clouds or under them that you could harry or bullyrag an enemy with and make him wish he hadn't come. And when the boy made his military salute and stood aside at last, I was proud enough to hug him. And all those other people were so dazed they looked partly petrified, partly drunk, and wholly caught out and snowed under. I judged that the cake was ours, and by a large majority. Education is a great thing. This was the same youth who had come to West Point so ignorant that when I asked him if a general officer should have a horse shot under him on the field of battle, what ought he to do, answered up naively and said, "Get up and brush himself." One of the young nobles was called up now. I thought I would question him a little myself. I said, "Can your lordship read?" His face flushed indignantly, and he fired this at me. "Takest me for a clerk? I trow, I am not of a blood that answer the question." He crowded his wrath down and made out to answer, "No." "Can you write?" He wanted to resent this, too, but I said, "You will confine yourself to the questions and make no comments. You are not here to air your blood or your graces, and nothing of the sort will be permitted. Can you write?" "No." "Do you know the multiplication table?" "I wit not what you refer to." "How much is 9 times 6? It is a mystery that is hidden from me by the reason that the emergency requiring the fathoming of it hath not in my life days occurred, and so, not having need to know this thing, I abide barren of the knowledge. If A trade a barrel of onions to B worth 2 pence the bushel, in exchange for sheep worth 4 pence and a dog worth a penny, and C kill the dog before delivery because bitten by the same, who mistook him for D, what sum is still due to A from B, and which party pays for the dog, C or D, and who gets the money? If A is the penny sufficient, or may he claim consequential damages in the form of additional money to represent the possible profit with which might have inured from the dog and classified as earned increment, that is to say, usufruct." "Verily, in all wise and unknowable providence of God, who moveth in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform, have I never heard the fellow to this question for confusion of the mind and congestion of the ducts of thought. Wherefore, I beseech you, let the dog and the onions and these people of the strange and godless names work out their several salvations from their piteous and wonderful difficulties without help of mine, for indeed their trouble is sufficient as it is, whereas an I tried to help, I should but damage their cause the more, and yet mayhap not live myself to see the desolation wrought. What do you know of the laws of attraction and gravitation? If there be such, mayhap, his grace the king did promulgate them, whilst I lay sick about the beginning of the year, and thereby failed to hear his proclamation. What do you know about the science of optics? I know of governors of places, and seneschals of castles, and sheriffs of counties, and many like small offices and titles of honor, but him you call science of optics I have not heard of before. Peradventure it is a new dignity. Yes, in this country. Try to conceive of this mollusk gravity, of this mollusk gravely applying for an office position of any kind under the sun. Why, he had all the earmarks of a typewriter copyist. If you leave out the disposition to contribute uninvited emendations of your grammar and punctuation, it was unaccountable that he didn't attempt a little help of that sort out of his majestic supply of incapacity for the job, but that he didn't prove that he hadn't material in him for the disposition. It only proved that he wasn't a typewriter copyist yet. After nagging him a little more, I let the professors loose on him, and they turned him inside out on the line of scientific war, and found him empty, of course. He knew somewhat about the warfare of the time, bushwhacking around ferogas and bullfights in the tournament ring and such things, but otherwise he was empty and useless. Then we took the other young noble in hand, and he was the first one's twin for ignorance and incapacity. I delivered them into the hands of the chairman of the board, with the comfortable consciousness that their cake was dough. They were examined in the previous order of precedence. Name, so you please. Pertipal, son of Sir Pertipal, Baron of Barley Marsh. Grandfather, also Sir Pertipal, Baron of Barley Marsh. Great-grandfather, the same name and title. Great-great-grandfather, we had none, worshipful sir, the line failing before it had reached so far back. It mattereth not. It is a good 4 generations, and fulfilleth the requirements of the rule. Fulfills what rule? I asked. The rule requiring 4 generations of nobility, or else the candidate is not eligible. A man is not eligible for lieutenancy in the army unless he can prove 4 generations of noble descent. Even so, neither lieutenant nor any other officer may be commissioned without that qualification. Oh, come, this is an astonishing thing. What good is such a qualification as that? What good? It is a hardy question, fair sir and boss, since it doth go far to impugn the wisdom of even our Holy Mother Church herself. As how? For that she hath established the self-same rule regarding saints. By her law none may be canonized until he hath lain dead 4 generations. I see, it is the same thing. It is wonderful. In the one case, a man lies dead alive 4 generations, mummified in ignorance and sloth, and that qualifies him to command live people and take their weal and woe into his impotent hands. And in the other case, a man lies bedded with death and worms 4 generations, and that qualifies him for the office in the celestial camp. Does the king's grace approve of this strange law? The king said, Why, truly, I see naught about it that is strange. All places of honor and profit do belong by natural right to them that be of noble blood, and so these dignities in the army are their property, and would be so without this or any rule. The rule is but to mark a limit. Its purpose is to keep out too recent a blood, which would bring into contempt these offices of men of lofty lineage would turn their backs and scorn to take them. I were to blame, and I permitted this calamity. You can permit it, and you are minded to do so, for you have the delegated authority. But that the king should do it were a most strange madness, and not comprehensible to any. I yield. Proceed, sir, Chief of Herald's College. The chairman resumed as follows. By what illustrious achievement, for the honor of the throne and state, did the founder of your great line lift himself to the sacred dignity of the British nobility? He built a brewery. Sire, the board finds this candidate perfect in all requirements and qualifications for military command, and does hold his case open for decision after due examination of his competitor. The competitor came forward and proved exactly 4 generations of nobility himself, so there was a tie in military qualifications that far. He stood aside a moment, and Sir Pertipole was questioned further. Of what condition was the wife of the founder of your line? She came of the highest landed gentry, yet she was not noble. She was gracious and pure and charitable, and blameless, and of a blameless life and character, inasmuch that these regards were she peer of the best lady in the land. That will do, stand down. He called up the competing lordling again, and asked, what was the rank and condition of the great-grandmother who conferred British nobility upon your great house? She was a king's leman, and did climb to that splendid eminence by her own unholpen merit from the sewer where she was born. Ah, indeed, is true nobility. This is the right and perfect intermixture. The lieutenancy is yours, fair lord. Hold it not in contempt. It is the humble step which will lead to grandeurs more worthy of the splendor of an origin like to thine. I was down in the bottomless pit of humiliation. I had promised myself an easy and zenith-scouring triumph, and this was the outcome. I was almost ashamed to look my poor disappointed cadet in the face. I told him to go home and be patient. This wasn't the end. I had a private audience with the king and made a proposition. I said it was quite right to the officer that it was quite right to officer that regiment with nobilities, and he couldn't have done a wiser thing. It would also be a good idea to add 500 officers to it. In fact, add as many officers as there were nobles and relatives of nobles in the country, even if there should finally be 5 times as many officers as privates in it, and thus make it the cracked regiment, the envied regiment, the king's own regiment, and entitled to fight on its own hook and in its own way, and go whither it would, and come when it pleased in time of war, and be utterly swell and independent. This would make the regiment the heart's desire of all the nobility, and they would all be satisfied and happy. Then, we would make up the rest of the standing army out of commonplace materials, and officer it